Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, March 1st, and the start of the 13th week of war for the United States. To report on the war, we're going to call in our reporters from abroad. So first, go ahead, London.
This is London. John MacVane speaking. About an hour ago, the Dutch government in London issued an official statement by the Dutch headquarters at Batavia. The statement announced that the Japanese have landed at 3 points in Java. Allied naval forces opposed one of the landing fleets, and Allied air forces attacked both the other landing fleets throughout the night. Dutch and American submarines came into action against the enemy naval forces and transports. Dutch Army units are said to be offering fierce resistance at the 3 points where the enemy landed. The oil field and refineries near Japo were demolished last night to prevent them falling into the hands of the Japanese. Dispatches from Java reaching London estimate unofficially the number of Japanese actually landed as somewhere between a few thousand and 4 divisions. This report says a heavy Japanese cruiser was sunk, 2 cruisers seriously damaged, while 3 destroyers were left burning. The Allies lost 3 cruisers and 1 destroyer, all Dutch, which was sunk. The British parachute raid on the coast of German-occupied France has acted as a tonic to the British. It's being emphasized, of course, that the raid wasn't any tremendous operation. But it's pleased everyone to think that the services can organize and carry out successfully a raid against the German forces that are in the position that most threatens Britain itself. The Sunday Express says, even if it isn't possible to answer Litvinov's appeal for a second front, Britain can surely use her commando force as it was meant to be used. The Sunday Express goes on, we can raid constantly at widely separated points of a long coastline. We can keep the Germans on the jump. We can give them both the jitters and the works. And the Express adds, we can thus draw off large German forces which would otherwise be at Russia's throat, follow Russia's grand example in total warfare, and give ourselves new heart. Let us have done with disheartened defense. Let us plunge wherever the smallest chance is offered to be attacked. Another commentator in Reynolds News says Britain's need is for fearless, straightforward criticism in Parliament and Whitehall. The hard, realistic thinking that will produce a counter-strategy as daring and successful as Hitler's. The paper calls the parachutists' raid a pointer to effective action and says, as one of a series of simultaneous blows, the combined operations raid can pay rich dividends. A British eyewitness of part of the operation says the parachutists' faces were blackened even to the teeth. The parachutists themselves were Scotchmen, and the men who protected the landing craft in the operation were London Cockneys and men from an English county regiment. One of the parachute leaders was a 21-year-old ex-newspaper man. The commander of the men who landed by boat was a former copy reader on the London paper. Factory workers, shipyard workers, professional football players, artists, and stockbrokers took part in the raid. One of the parachutists said the Germans had a whole armored division 50 miles away, and just before they left, the parachutists had seen a column of headlights coming toward the beach. A couple of days ago, the British Labour Party issued a pamphlet that cost the equivalent of a nickel. It's called The Old World and the New Society, and it sums up British Labour's ideas on what kind of a world should come out of the war and what should be done now to achieve it. The report has been unanimously adopted by the Executive Council of the party. It's been issued at a time when the British working people are groping for concrete ideas, for some assurance that their lives will be fuller and more promising after this war than during the pre-war days. The workers of many factories have from time to time met and sent delegates to the Labor Ministry or some other government ministry or to Labor Party headquarters. They've complained not about wages and hours, but about inefficiency. They've said their effort wasn't being used at 100% efficiency because of management's failure to organize work on the most modern lines. The workers have said, too, that they want to feel that the effort they're making now will be used for the good of the many, not the profits of the few. The Labor report asserts that the basis of democracy must be planned production for community use. It says that to secure the fulfillment of the 4 freedoms, Britain must organize to provide things like full employment, better social services, and maintain wartime controls over industry and agriculture to avoid the same sort of scramble for profits as that which followed the last war. The significance of the report is that it's the first publicized attempt to chart the course of the post-war world. The first attempt to give a concrete response to the worries of the ordinary English working man and the English Tommy when he wonders what kind of a life he'll have to look forward to when the war is ended. This is John MacVane in London, returning you to New York.
And from the New York newsroom, here's a brief news story. Cairo, Egypt. A small enemy column was successfully engaged by British artillery in the desert of North Africa, east of El Mekili, according to the British. There was considerable patrol activity in which the Air Force gave support, according to the communique. Next now, news from our allies in the Pacific, brought to us through the newsroom in San Francisco.
We are unable to contact Sydney, Australia this morning. However, from our San Francisco newsrooms, we bring you the headlines of the Pacific fighting. 16 Japanese bombers and fighters attacked Port Moresby yesterday and caused some damage, the High Command reported today. RAAF planes attempted to attack a Jap convoy off Kupang, but were intercepted by enemy fighters, the communique said. However, all planes returned safely to their bases. Planes of the RAAF bombed the runway of the airfield at Gasmata, New Britain, last night, the High Command added. Now here are further details from the fighting in Batavia. The long-expected battle for Java raged bitterly today along the northern and western shores of that island stronghold, heart of the Netherlands East Indies, after an historic sea battle in which Dutch warships sacrificed themselves in a vain attempt to keep the invaders from their precious land.
This is war. The four major networks unite to present the fourth in their series for wartime America. Unite Your Army, written by Stephen Vincent Benet. Tyrone Power is our principal voice.
Army, ground, air, and supplies. Infantry. Cavalry. Skirmishers. Artillery. Artillery. Shout out the numbers not in store. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Article 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That is the Second Amendment to the Constitution. The men who passed it had been through a long, hard war to make their free state. They knew how that state must be kept. And remember what Washington said? To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. The free people ought not only to be armed, but disciplined. Washington spoke from experience. He'd seen his men starve. He'd seen them chased like foxes. Here's one of his generals, writing a letter home.
The whole army has now gone into winter cantonment, excepting General Nixon's and my brigade, who are now in the field, 800 of my men without shoes or stockings, enjoying the sweets of a winter campaign, while the worthy and virtuous citizens of America are enduring the hardships, toils, and fatigues incident to parlors with good fires and sleeping on beds of down.
Forget it? Of course. It happened over 150 years ago, and we won that one, didn't we? Yes. But let's just hear one more witness. The father of the idol of the South, the cavalryman they called Light Horse Harry Lee.
Government is the murder of its citizens, which sends them to the field uninformed and untaught. They're there to meet men of the same age, mechanized by education and discipline.
Pretty grim, isn't it? Pretty businesslike. And pretty contemporary. Are you listening, gentlemen of Congress? That was Batavia, falling. Are you listening, you good, decent, honest, peace-minded Americans? And you're all of that, who didn't see and couldn't see why our country needed a real army? We forgot, of course. We're apt to forget between wars, forget the voices and the warnings. We cut the standing army down to 80 men right after the Revolution. And in 1812, we fought another war. Then we were invaded and our capital was burned. But we won that one. And in 46 and 61, we fought other wars.
Yes, Sergeant, what's the trouble? There's 200 men with their rifles just come down here from the hills of Kentucky. They all want to enlist at once, and I just can't do a thing with it. Well, where are men? Where are men? Hell, they don't want to be swore in. They just want to know where this place called Matamoros is. And how soon can they get there and start shooting?
Yes, that's the spirit. That's always been the spirit. And in 61.
We are a band of brothers devoted to the toil, fighting for our poverty, against by our toil. And when the lights are heaven, we loudly cry hurrah, hurrah for the wonderful flag that goes to the single star. We are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 strong, from Mississippi, winding stream, and from New England shore. We are coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abraham, with 300,000 more.
A good spirit. A fine spirit. No better fighters on earth than the men who fought with Scott and Taylor, Lee and Grant. And the regular army, small, handicapped, kicked around in peacetime like a football, did its job without brag or bluster, and did it well. But the boys who died at Matamoros and First Bull Run died only too often as Light Horse Harry Lee said they shouldn't die, uninformed and untrained. They died at Chickamauga in 98 of fever. They died on San Juan Hill. They went to France in 17 and 18. 2 million of them, first and last. We know what they did there. The German General Staff said we couldn't put an army in the field. We put 2 million men. They broke the enemy's front and went to the Rhine. Then we demobilized. Glad to. Wasn't the world at peace? Well, you know what happened. But this time we did make some plans. For the first time in history, we raised a draft army before war fell on us. Raised it fair and square, by lot and law. Raised it out of just the same sort of Americans who fought at Trenton and Cerro Gordo, Chancellorsville and Pennsylvania. And we've got it now. And it's working. Forget the past for a moment. Forget even the heroic names of the past. This is war. And this is now. Not yesterday. Not Gettysburg or the Marne, the Alamo or Chateau Thierry, but now. That's a map of the world, the whole round globe of Earth. It's in the office of the Chief of Staff at Washington, General George C. Marshall. He is the 10th man in all our history to wear the 4 silver stars of a full general. He is the first American general who ever had to plan a grand strategy that took in all the world. The quiet room, this central brain cell of the Army. The men who go in and out of it wear uniforms. The man who sits at the big desk wears a uniform. Otherwise, it's rather like any executive office. There's no spur jingling or table pounding. The papers flow in and out, and the calls go in and out, night and day, from the three great branches of the Army: ground, air, and supply. Red tape? Brass hat? I thought you'd ask about that. We're a funny people that way when it comes to our Army. We wouldn't hire a lawyer who'd never been to law school. We wouldn't employ a surgeon who'd never done an appendectomy. But if a man has been schooled and trained all his life in the theory and practice of war, why, he's a red-tape brass hat and everybody's free to criticize. And yet, war is also a profession. Ask the actors. I wonder just who are the red-tape brass hats. MacArthur, the West Point graduate, sat in this room once. Or the country club strategist who tells us all how to win the war over cocktails. Marshall, the VMI graduate. Or the congressman from South Overcoat who never fired a gun. Yes, I wonder sometimes. We pay General Marshall $8,000 a year. That's not very big money, is it? And the same to MacArthur for holding off 200,000 Japs on Luzon. But they aren't thinking about the pay. They're satisfied. And what do they do to earn their pay? Where do the plans get executed? What sort of news comes into the quiet room? Let's listen a minute. Short wave.
Hello. Hello, Brad. This is Truman. Yeah, I'm talking from Ulster. We just landed. Well, I guess I was the first guy ashore, so the old man said I could broadcast. Oh, yeah, it's fine, and the folks are swell here. Yeah, I got my clean socks on. Yeah, remember me to Bud and the boy.
That was a private in the United States Army talking from Northern Ireland. And here.
Yes, Susie. I hope this finds you okay, just as it leaves me. It's cold around here, but a guy who's used to Minnesota can't quit. Pretty scenery, too. So the farm's different. Well, we've got a job to do, and I guess we mean to do it. All the same, Susie, I'd kind of like to hear from you. Your last letter was swell, but I ain't had one since. You might write a guy once in a while.
That was a corporal attached to our task force in Iceland. Now,
enemy activity during the past 24 hours were negligible. It is believed the Japanese plans for the renewal of the offensive were dislocated by our successes in the Subic Bay air attack.
that was MacArthur's men. Tonight, from the foxholes of Bataan. Still holding. And here,
Reporting to Chief of Staff. American Task Force 3 safely landed at Rendezvous K in South Pacific.
Iceland, Luzon, Batavia, Alaska, the Caribbean, halfway around the world. American troops are marching. American planes are flying. But why? Why? We're defending ourselves, aren't we? We built an army for defense, didn't we? So why do we have to fight all over the map? Listen, here's your answer. You hear that? That's the B-19, the biggest bomber yet built in the USA. So big that when a pilot wants to rev up a motor, he doesn't do it himself. He phones someone else to do it. So big she can carry 18 tons of bombs from New York to Athens and back, 7,000 miles under her own power. So big that she just got finished and already outmoded.
Outmoded?
Yes. But we learned a lot from making her. And on the drawing board now are airplane motors that develop even more thousands of horsepower. They'll be made, and they'll fly the planes and keep them flying. How far? Maybe halfway around the world. The world has shrunk like a squeezed orange. Old tools of war are obsolete.
Absolute.
You can bomb Detroit from west. You can bomb Pearl Harbor from the waist to the Pacific. You can bomb Philadelphia from Iceland. And what stops the bombers? You have to have bases to stop them. You have to have hangars and ground crews and landing fields where your own planes can take off. You have to have guns and men to protect those bases.
Last night, I was over Berlin. Tonight, I'm here in Boston. It's an odd sensation, rather, but it happened. I caught the ferry plane.
That British pilot. You've read about him in the papers. Last night, Berlin. Tonight, And that's just the air. Just one huge phase of modern war. What about the ground?
Help Bob 3 miles.
That was a single German tank unit in the Battle of France. In the last war, an advance of 63 miles usually meant weeks of fighting, the lives of thousands of men. But this is mechanized war, modern war, war of rupture, war that flies through the air at 400 miles an hour, war that spills and runs like quicksilver on lands and homes that only yesterday were peaceful and miles away from the gun. War fought around the curve of Earth, quick-hitting, hard-striking, sudden, deadly. Call the roll. Have we got the tools to fight it? What tools have we got? What machines?
Well, here's one of them. Mechanical range computer. What the boys call a jukebox in anti-aircraft. Kind of a brainy old buzzard. Hooks up with the rangefinder and the sound illustrator and the searchlight. Figures out the speed and altitude and range of enemy planes and then sets the gun so your shells burst on the target. It's all by its little self once you turn those wheels. And it doesn't make mistakes. When you start coming over, Mr. Hitler, just remember the jukebox, boys.
Modern war. War of machines and skills, of dials and calibrations and micrometers. War we're able to fight because we know about them. Because when we want, we can make the best machines in the world. You've heard about our bomb sights. Well,
That it? Yep, that's the baby, and she's everything they say. Looks good. Looks good. Listen, soldier, with that little hippotippy, you can drop a bomb in a pickle barrel once you've got the know-how. That's how Kelly and his bombardiers sank the Haruna. And they weren't shooting wild. They knew how. Now, just take a...
what's that?
155 millimeter gun, sir. Force, $50,000. Weight, 30,000 pounds. Fires a 95-pound shell nearly 15 miles. What's more than it? Well, you can haul it around by bucket cycle. Camouflage. You can use it right behind your front line. We call this one Kate Smith. She's a honey. We're going to need a lot of them.
Hear that? You folks in the shop? How many Kate Smiths are coming off the production line? How many can you make?
50 caliber machines on air cool. Automatic, used by motorized infantry. Terrific hitting pump.
But how many? How many? A triangular division needs plenty of machine guns. And every production day counts in this kind of war. And we could show you the light tanks and the mediums, the rangefinders and the fuse timers and all the tools of modern war. We could show you the Jeep. Come in, Jeep. How fast can you travel, Jeep?
60 miles an hour on good roads, but I mean, and a bad one. My mother was a tin Lindy and my father was a jackrabbit. Out hardcore men and their stuff without home machine guns and mortars. I'm a fat, friendly runner and a bulldog and an arm of faded. Tell the bar breakfast get there. Give me room. I got the jump from free and the cut to the carrier, and I'm hard to kill. Tell me, that's me. Jeep.
Thank you very much, Jeep.
Oh, me talk for hour. Can a guy have a little dignity when he's on the air?
Okay, Scout Car. Dismissed. Sure. We could show you all those. We could show you other things and take all night showing them because for every man we put in the front line, there are something like 8 men behind us. And if those men aren't on the job, the man at the front is out of luck. The people we're going to talk to now don't always get their names in the papers. But if they weren't on the job, we wouldn't have an army. What's your job, soldier?
Me? I cook for the 4th Battery. Boy, can those buzzards eat.
Must be a pretty soft job just cooking for a gang of soldiers.
Says you. We just listen to them howl when the scout don't suit them. Not that I blame them. They food me a cut to make a soldier, and that's my job.
Well, anyhow, it sounds like a nice, easy detail.
Yes, says you. You ever open the argon?
No.
Well, I would. Nice, quiet place to cook for Battery, the argon. Just as nice and quiet and safe as a 4-alarm fire. I drew 3 months hospital. It wasn't because I got wounded opening tin cans.
Thanks, soldier. And, by the way, I've got a message for you.
Yeah?
The sergeant said to be sure to ask you how you were picked for lemon extract.
Lemon extract? I don't blast-sided son of... Lemon extract? There, you get out of my kitchen before I taste it.
I wonder what made him so sore. Didn't mean to do it. You make a battery cut store and you're in for trouble. Oh, here's somebody with a hat cord I don't recognize. Maroon and white. Excuse me, soldier. Could you tell me just why you've got a different hat cord from these other men?
Medical corps, sir.
Oh, that is medical corps.
Yes, sir. I'm a pill roller. Stretcher bearer in action. This is my field kit.
You seem to be pretty well supplied.
Has to be, sir. Casualties have to be prepared.
And tell me, do you go out under fire?
Wouldn't do much good if I didn't, sir. The faster you can get the wounded out, the better chance they've got.
Thank you. And you? First sergeant, signal corps. Used to be a telephone line. That's my job. I thought nowadays it was all radio. Oh, we got good radio. Got the walkie-talkie. That's a two-way radio outfit one man can carry on his back. Used for liaison communication. But we still need telephones and installation. Still need men to carry the lines to the front and repair them. Keep them working no matter if all hell's breaking. This kind of army needs both wireless and wire. And men who can work them both. I can see that. And you?
I'm a quartermaster sergeant. Sure, we count blankets, we count shoes, we hand out the rations. Well, that's all they'll tell you we do. But if the grub doesn't get to the railhead, and if it doesn't get from there to the crooks, the guy up front's going to go pretty hungry. And if his shoes don't fit and he goes lame, he's a soldier out of action.
Thanks. That's just a few of the skills and services that go to the making of an army. And right where the shooting starts... Oh, would you come up to the mic a minute, soldier, with the blue hat cord and the crossed rifles on your collar? Who are you and what's your job?
I'm infantry. I'm Private Dogface. I'm Private 1 Million. Draft number 2985. Dog tag number 893-247. Otherwise, I'm just the guy who occupies ground. They land me in planes from the air. They shoot me up to the front in trucks and scout cars. But a lot of the time, still, I walk. Yeah. Even with all the wheels and machines of modern war, I walk, I creep, I dig, and I burrow, and I wiggle ahead. I take cover, and I creep some cover, and I hold the line. I hide all day in the foxholes under the bombing. And last out, I marched with the Continentals, and I marched with the Army of the Valley, and in France, I went ahead through the week. And I'm still marching. I'm blind without planes, and you gotta give me planes. I can't fight tanks with my bare hands, and you gotta give me tanks. I'm not artillery, and you gotta give me guns. But when all's said and done, I'm the guy who holds the ground. I'm not just a foot slogger with a rifle in this new army. I'm a member of a combat team, trained like a football squad with plenty of the razzle-dazzle stuff, the Notre Dame stuff, and the Army stuff, and the Rose Bowl stuff of modern war. My first job, and my last, is to take the ground and hold the ground. I may do it 40 miles an hour. I may do it 2 miles a day. I'm going to be cold and wet, hungry and thirsty, and tired beyond tiredness. I'm going to see my friends die. Hear the wounded cry out like a whispering field. But I'm going ahead. And I'm going to win. The ground gripper, the infantry, Private Dogface of the U.S. Army.
And what are we going to do, sitting here at our radios? Squabble some more? Write letters to the papers? Hoard sugar? Curse out the government? Spread the lies that divide a people? Hold up in a chilly sweat every time there's bad news? There's bad news now, and there's going to be bad news for quite a while. The Army knows that. Our enemies aren't pushovers. They are skillful, savage, and relentless. They've trained for years for this chance to enslave the world, and that's just what they mean to do. They'll use every trick and tool. On the other hand, they aren't supermen. They didn't come down from Mars. They can be licked, and they will be licked, by men. Not by men without machines or by machines without men, but by men fighting for freedom with the right sort of tools in their hands. And taste this one in your hat. It wasn't just the snow and the cold and the mud that bogged down the German drive in Russia. It was a fighting army and a fighting people. It wasn't just tradition and Magna Carta that stopped the Luftwaffe cold in the Battle of London. It was a fighting Air Force and a fighting people. We've got the fighting army, and it's going to fight, all the way around the curve of Earth. Men are going to die. Very good men are going to die. They're going to die in the jungles for the shape of a Virginia field and the crossroads store back home. They're going to die in the cold for the clear air of Montana and the smell of a New York street and the church where they used to go if they went to church. For some things they learned at school and for some things we've all of us learned. For 3 words cut in gray rock: beauty, honor, country. And for an idea called freedom. I'm not going to use the big words. I'm not going to talk about sacrifice or in vain. We are going to know such sacrifices as we have not known since Valley Forge. And unless we win this war, even that will be in vain. It's you that I'm talking to. And you, all over America. We've got a fighting army. Let's show them a fighting people. You see, armies differ. In some countries, an army means a steely political machine, dominating the government, trampling on the rights of the people. What's our army? Let's hear from one of its historians.
It has the soul of its own. It is nothing in itself. It is everything as an organ of government. It has no political aims, no political ambitions. Its commander-in-chief is a civilian. It is the people's army, and theirs alone.
In some countries, an army is run by a heel-clicking military caste.
Get into the cover, you civilian swine. Don't you know the sidewalk is for officers?
Yes, Capitan. Certainly, Capitan. Prepare, Capitan. No. That isn't our army, and it never has been. We have our training school for regular officers, West Point. Money won't get you into West Point, and neither will a social register. No graduate of West Point has ever tried to upset the political system of this country. No graduate of West Point has ever tried to build up a ruling military caste. They are men who do their hard jobs for less than civilian wages. And when they retire, for a few of them, there's a medal in a box and a flag hung up on the wall of a cramped suburban apartment. And for others, there are the graves. The graves in Arlington, at Poisson, in the cemetery at Manila, in the unmarked ground. The graves mark, "Here lies an American soldier, known only to God." But meanwhile, they do their job and they live up to their specifications. Duty, honor, country. That's our ruling military caste. And the others, well, you know them. The lawyer, the doctor, the florist, the man you take the 510 with, the hacker, the clerk, the farmer, everybody who's got somewhere a piece of paper with the seal of the United States on it and the words honorable discharge. That's our army, the people's army, and their sons are in it today. It's an old army and a new one. It goes back to the cross-belted Continentals and the farmers who held their fire at Bunker Hill. It's Dan Morgan's riflemen and Stonewall Jackson's foot cavalry and the Rainbow Division and the men who hold loose arms. It's the dandy silk stocking outfits from the cities and the sergeant with half a dozen hash marks. The shave tail fresh from the point with his class ring shiny on his finger and Private Percy of the kitchen police. It's an army that calls its leaders Marse Robert and Old Jack, Ulysses and Old Iron Pants and the Green Hornet. An army with its tongue in its cheek and its gun in its hand. A disciplined army, you bet, but our own kind of discipline. An army that takes the machines like a duck to water. The fighting army of the American people. Of the people, by the people, and for the people. First, last, and all the time. Are you back of it? Listen.
This is the army. This is your army. The United States Army. Let's go! We got the stuff that we got from one. We got the act for the action point. The great big act for the great big point. Here it comes. On us. Toe to toe. We are the army. The American army. The United States Army. That's time.
Listen to Your Army, written by Stephen Vincent Benet and starring Tyrone Power, who appeared by courtesy of the Hollywood Victory Committee. The original musical score was composed and conducted by Morton. Norman Corwin was director of the broadcast, and Howard Nussbaum assistant director. At the same time next week, the four major networks again unite the resources of American radio to present another program, The United Nations. This is war. This is war. The four major networks present the sixth in their series of broadcasts for wartime America. Our program tonight is called You're on Your Own, starring Ezra Stone and Claude Rains. Those are the German radio chimes, meaning stand by. Big stuff coming. Ready, folks? All right, ladies and gentlemen, get a load of this. That's Schickelgruber of Berchtesgaden explaining how he would have been in Moscow 6 months ago, except for the fact that a couple of dozen annihilated Russian armies didn't stay annihilated. And get this.
È meglio vivere un giorno da leone che 100 anni da pecora.
That is the Roman wonder, Musso the Terrible, who says Italians live like lions. They do all right, only in cages. And here's another.
法律は人を選ばず辛抱する気に金がなる。噂をすれば影がさす。止めておったものは昼間選べ。
That is General Homer. Don't mind him. He's just saying about how maybe it would be a good idea if he were to commit harry-carry. Seems things haven't been going too well with the rising sun on the peninsula of Bataan. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is me. I'm Ed Bascom. Works for the government in Washington, D.C. Work in a place called the Department of People's Interests. It's a pretty busy place, and it's getting busier by the hour. I could give you an idea of how busy it is from the way it sounds there. And although I might be exaggerating a little for purposes of dramatic license, you get the idea. Well, now, take a morning recently in the DPR.
Department of Public Interest. Yes, one moment, please. Department of Public Interest. Yes, go ahead, please. You're connected.
Listen, send it on the back. Also, be sure to get that folder on priorities back from Marchbank, and let me see the guys.
Yes?
Bascom.
Yes?
Here's a report on the 6 Midwestern states. 18% believe they're doing all they can. 4% believe that the war effort is not up to schedule.
Okay.
Mayor Brooksville, Wisconsin, on long distance, wants to know if government will provide bomb insurance for
I'll make it out of it.
Can you talk to him, please, in the lane?
Not
Bascom, there's a man from Portland, Oregon waiting outside. He wants to turn over the services of 80 draft horses
80
to
draft
the government.
Mr.
Do you want to
Bascom, there's an air raid warden calling from London. Says he's coming to lecture in the southern states on fire protection and wants an okay on clipper passes.
We'll take the horses. Write a letter on the insurance matter. Okay for the warden in London. Now, no more calls until 11 because I've got this stack of papers to clear out. By the way, Mortensen, will you,
Mr. Jones calling you, Mr. Bascom, on line 5.
Jones? Which Jones? Jesse Jones?
No, sir. Says his name is Wilbur Jones.
Wilbur?
Of Maplewood.
Oh, Wilbur Jones. The average American citizen. Well, I want to talk to him. Put him on. Quiet, everybody, please. Wilbur Jones on the line. Quiet. Hello. Hello. Oh, hello, Jones. Yep. Huh? You what? You want to know what you can do? Oh, for the war. Been bothering you, you say? Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll fly right out. What, Jones? I can't hear you.
Staff meeting at 3 o'clock.
Just a second, Jones. Quiet, will you, please? Quiet. Quiet. This is an important man, Wilbur Jones, average American. Yeah, I met him once on a smoking car. I got to see him right away. Jones can't wait forever. Hello, Jones. Jones? No, I said fly right out. Tonight? Sure. Okay. Well, dinner? Well, that's mighty nice of you. Sure, you bet. Okay. Goodbye. Hortense, get me plane passage on the...
Here it is. 3:30 plane gets you in 5:45 and time for dinner at 6.
Very good. All right, Elvis, back to work. Of course, that is a little exaggerated for purposes of dramatic license.
service isn't that good. But anyway, a man can get to Maplewood on the 3:30 plane in time for an important dinner at 6 o'clock wartime.
Harry! Excuse me, Mr. Bascom. Harry! Come on down now. You're holding up dinner.
Well, you feel ready to tackle a good meal, Mr. Bascom? Yes, Jones. This is going to be my first home-cooked meal in, carton of coffee and a sandwich on a desk blotter is all I can remember.
Oh, Mr.
Nice little biscuit.
I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I was looking over my athletic medals.
All right, now, Harry, sit down.
No kidding. Did you really come all the way from Washington just to see us Joneses?
Oh, do you know anybody more important?
Well, sit down. Sit right down now, Mr. Bascom. Things will get cold. The way you...
Sit right here. Thanks.
Everything right over here in the house.
Looks good.
You wash your hands, Harry?
All right. Yeah, all right, buddy.
Help yourself.
Thanks. Make a couple of ladles with gravy.
Oh, you get it all.
Well, how goes the war? Well, that's just what I was going to ask you folks. That's what I came out for. I want to know how you're getting along.
We kind of thought maybe you could sort of tell us a few things about the war.
Well, maybe I can. But first, thanks. Are you in civilian defense?
Yes, I signed up. Wanted to be a volunteer auxiliary policeman, but I got a bad back.
Yeah, I see the lot next door is plowed up. Yours?
It'll be mine when the weeds start growing.
I guess we'll all right. We'll have to do all the
don't plan
work.
to use much fertilizer, do you? You know, I mean to say it's kind of short. Nitrogen, you know. Those TNT, partly. We need to grow things, but, well, there's not enough fertilizer for the farmers.
Yeah, I read about that. No. Lot next door's lain fallow for 17 years. She'll produce without a sack of fertilizer.
Well, now, look, if I seem to be trying, I...
Oh, no. Go right ahead.
Thanks. You're sharing your car?
Yeah? Alternate. It's 2 miles to the Power and Light Company.
Won't you help yourself?
Ned Davis and Joe Harrison, Bill Best and I double up. You might say we quadruple up.
What are you doing, Harry?
Nothing. Not really. I shop for Mom on my bike. Cart around the stuff the women share. Sewing machines, vacuum cleaners, things for sick people like sun lamps. Is it really true that every time a person buys a sun lamp they could borrow, it means one less headlight on a Jeep?
That's about the size of it.
But I'm going to chuck it soon. I'll be 18 next February. Dad, you said you couldn't decide. Can't I ask Mr. Bascom?
No, Harry.
Can't I, when we got the government right in our dining room, practically?
Oh, now, Harry, Mr. Bascom is not...
Harry is pretty good in science, Mr. Bascom. Getting a scholarship to state. May not look like a chemist now, but someday... First it was convoys, then Hawaii, then Bataan, and the Dutch. All over those islands with the crazy
Put them up and then get them
But
out.
I sit here. They took Chubby Waters. He was only a guard, and I'm captain and fullback. Next year...
Who took Chubby Waters?
The Navy, the United States Navy. For all I know, Chubby is with MacArthur by now, and me going for the laundry.
Harry, how's your nerve?
Nerve? Have I got nerve? Boy, you just let me get on a ship and I'll show you something. Anchors away!
I asked, how's your nerve? Your real nerve, son. Because we win soon, we'll need good chemists. But, well, if it takes us a long time, you won't get your chance to tote a gun, Harry.
You wouldn't think laundry would take so much nerve. Mom, couldn't we get a washwoman that lives nearer?
Sit still, Mother. I'll take
No, I'll answer it.
Harry, who's the other end of that phone, huh?
Hello, Alice?
That's his
Am I
girl,
going to see you
Alice
tonight?
Newton.
Don't mind the boy, Mr. Bascom.
We do what we can, Mr. Bascom. Wilbur works as a repairman, free, on house equipment, since he can't be an auxiliary policeman.
By no means.
Why, men want to fiddle around all night with flashlights, anyhow.
Well, it'd be kind of different if Hitler started to call the signals. You've got 5 war production plants in Maplewood.
Alice, that's absolutely the most atrocious... What was his name?
Wilbur...
Oh, that punk.
Wilbur thinks it's going to be a long war, and everything has to last. Lately, I've even seen him pound rusty nails straight.
You think it's going to be long, eh?
I do. I wouldn't do it, Alice, not under any circumstances. Movies are one thing, a hayride is another.
More pie, Mr. I couldn't, thanks, no. Jonesy, just that pie makes you a lucky man.
Well, I'm surprised, to say the very least.
You had a blackout yet?
Blackout, I should say so. Wilbur's built practically a fort in the cellar. I told Wilbur that if the Oak Street Church was dropped on our house from 5 miles up, that cave wouldn't even shake. But he kept on shoring it up with old railroad ties.
Fine.
A girl like you. I can't get the car. But it's parked out in back. We could sit in it.
I think we might go up to the den for coffee where it's quieter.
Not tonight? I didn't know we were discussing the future.
Well, we'll just slip up to my den, Mother, where we can talk things over man to man.
Listen, will you let me talk?
Harry, shout so. He's not really as...
Well, I've had growing pains myself, Mrs. Jones. Hey, it looks to me like you're doing things right here in Maplewood. Well, what we find out about. A lot more we could do, though, Mr. Bascom.
Well, that's what you say. I don't really think it matters one iota, or even 2 iotas.
You know, people around here are used to work. I wouldn't say they enjoyed the idea of going to war again. Just go right through that door and on up. Isn't much of a den. It's a walled-off part of the attic, actually. Yes, people were dead set against it till those assorted, clay-faced, backstabbing, dirty pygmies... right in there. Nice place. You get the buck? Mm-hmm. Before I was married. A bunch of us went to Canada. Take the Navajo chair, Mr. Bascom. Say, would you like a spot? I got a bottle of stuff here. I don't use much. The old lady'd have a fit. No, thanks. No, I've been on the wagon since December the 7th. Oh. Now, if it isn't asking too much, Mr. Bascom... How about calling me Ed? Well, Ed. You know, that's what the president called me. The only time we ever met. If he can, you can. Oh, all right, Ed. That suits me fine. Now, Ed, man to man, just between these 4 walls, how are things going? How's it going to turn out? Well, Jonesy, it's not going so good. You mean you think we could lose? Well, that's up to you, Jonesy. Well, up to me? How do you figure that out? Well, now, look. What's that? Harry practicing the bugle practices a half hour every night. I'll close the door. You want to know how the winning of the war is up to you? Yeah. Well, for one thing, you know, it all depends almost as much on how you fight as on how the men in the field fight. Also depends on who you fight. You know, whether you fight the government instead of Germany, or the labor unions instead of the Japs, or your neighbors instead of Mussolini. You know, there are some people who are still not too sure they want to win this war. You mean Americans? Yes, sir. Now, let me give you an idea what you're up against. Just follow me in your imagination to a big city, a big building in the city, a room in a tower, newspaper office, but not noisy, because this is the editor-in-chief, the publisher, dictating an editorial for tomorrow's paper.
Paragraph. The present situation in the Orient is so complex and full of amazing possibilities that we are almost led to wonder whether an arrangement between Japan and Russia could not be made under cover at the expense of India. Period. Would it be inconceivable for Japan to stop dead at Burma and hand India over to the Russians in return for a free hand where she is now? New paragraph. Will the future weeks and months make India the goat? No, delete that. Determine the price England will have to pay to keep her Russian ally hacking away.
Well, that's the kind of poison this guy is pumping out on his big presses and feeding his chain papers with, too. Why, he might as well be working for Goebbels, that guy. Because all he's accomplishing is confusion, dividing people. Then pretty Adolf can walk in and conquer. That old pook should be receiving the German Distinguished Service Cross any day now. Ed, I suppose a lot of good, square Americans have been taken in by that brand of guy. I'm afraid so. I hope they find out the truth before it's too late. So do I. And we're going to help them find it out. And while we're at it, I'd like you to meet another type. You'll find her maybe in a fancy joint in New York, resplendent in sparkling evening clothes, and maybe with one cocktail too many now. And she has very definite ideas about the wave of the future.
Mussolini he was efficient, wasn't he? Hitler got rid of the Catholics and the Jews, didn't he? Why, Gilbert, you don't know progress when you see it. The way of the future, Gilbert, my dear.
Why, that's the most awful, dirty, rotten old town. Makes you mad. Ready to tear anybody apart, Jones?
Listen, Ed, have we got many people like that? Aren't most of them trying like you and me?
Trying, Jonesy? You bet. Now, if you want to hear about them...
Well, sure I want to. Who wouldn't?
And you listen to this, Jonesy. You listen to this.
Oh, dear. 3 o'clock already.
Oh, blast that alarm. I was sound asleep.
It's 3. I gotta get going.
Day after day. 1 week, 2, 10, all winter. Up at 3 and off in the car, and I have to walk to the office. Oh, no kidding, Stella.
Oh, I'll be on a better shift to have time off when we get more volunteers.
Yeah, I know. Well, when? How long have they been trying to get more women with husbands crazy enough to let them get up in the middle of the night and go to work spotting planes? I never see you anymore. Men ought to do that stuff.
And women got us so men won't have to. Go back to sleep, Johnny. I'll be all right. If Hitler sends any bombers over this berg, you can go on sleeping till 7. Because we gals in the filter center will catch him at it and send our fighters up in time. So long, Johnny.
So long, Stell. Win the war. That's the woman volunteer in the Air Raid Report Service in the filter center. Now, here, off the coast of Maine, you'll find some other people on the job.
See him? Can't even see the lighthouse.
Yeah, no.
Yes, that's him.
What do you say?
East, northeast, about.
Okay, phone it in.
Phone it in. All right. This Kendall, G11, report, number K.
Okay.
Course 19.
19.
Code 36.
36.
Letter M.
M.
M as in mumps.
There are ships. Navy planes in from patrol.
What they say? There are ships. Navy planes in from patrol. They're going to be a long night.
What kind of work is that, Ed? Going to airplane spotters. Like that's the whole town works at it in shifts. Now, here's another operation actually going on.
Very close attention, please.
He's taking the anesthetic, well?
Yes, Doctor.
Scalpel? Now, you ladies who are here to observe, note that the initial incision is made in the patient's skin with this instrument. Now, quick stroke. Sponge nurse. Somebody carry the lady over to the other table. Remember, you're the ones who wanted to watch. Hemostat nurse. Sponge. Yep. Another sponge, please. Bleeder, I guess. If any more of you volunteer first aiders are going to faint, please step out in the corridor. Hemostat. Now, to those of you who are still on your feet, I'd like to say to you that... What was all that? Women. Taking first aid courses. Thousands of them have gone to hospitals to learn to get real experience with the site of real injury. Hundreds fainted at first, but they all came back. Not one has kept on fainting. All quit the course.
Yes, but look, Ed, we can't work in an air raid center. There isn't one here. We can't spot planes or even study advanced first aid. Mother's got the kids. I work. Aren't there any other kinds of jobs in this war?
I was getting to that. Now, I got some letters in my briefcase here from people. Some they wrote to OCD, some to the president. They're all working. They all meant what they wrote. Now, here,
excuse me just a minute. I'll just have to tone down Toscanini a little bit. He's just showing off for your benefit. Harry!
Yes, Dad?
Listen, will you take that bugle down to the cellar and blow it into the furnace?
You mean you want me to make hot music?
He gets that from listening to Sam and Sue on the radio. Please go on with your letter, Ed.
Well, now, here's a typical one from a boy out in the Northwest.
I'm blind. I'm 25. I have a seeing eye dog named Rex. I wanted to help in the war, but being blind, I thought I was hopeless. And then I heard about people like me used in England during the blackouts. To Rex and me, blackout is the same as daylight. We guide people.
One woman says I saved her from being run over.
I'm very happy about this.
And listen to this Polish woman.
I have 9 children. We know what has happened to Poland. We do not wish this to happen to our new country. Everywhere we ask to help. Then army camp is coming here, a big one. All 5 of my daughters are taught by me to sew like in our country. Be so good. I go and I say to soldier, 5 daughters, 1 Polish woman, we will men. So now be men. Socks, shirts, uniforms, hundreds. I am very excited on having letter in person to me of thanks from Sergeant himself. Probably only Polish woman this part of city with letter in person from Sergeant.
Flocks of them, Jonesy. All ages, all kinds. Now, you take that old man in Boise, Idaho.
I'm not much good at 82, but there's 300 less fire hazard in this town and kind of me going around with a bushel basket and a shovel. If they start dropping them incinerators...
And listen to this fighting Irisher.
Patrick, says I, this here's a public fight. And at fighting now, the Irish have something of a reputation. Patrick, I repeat, it's the best thing for all of the history of human beings. The Irish have not missed a scrap for 2,000 years. And we don't want to sit around for that length of time explaining why we passed up this one. So off comes me...
Some of the volunteers come from, well, the wrong side of the tracks. I was obliged to visit their homes. It was extremely unpleasant at first, but the need was so great. I started the clinic out of pity. But now I pity myself as I used to be before I'd crossed the...
It's no sign that just because I'm from Italy, I like Il Duce. Sure, I buy a bigger picture, Il Duce, just the same. I hang him up. And then I buy some vegetables. And I hang them up the biggest sign. She's a read. You bring in the shoes to be fixed, and you get a free shot at the Duce.
Well, that's enough, Ed. I get it. I guess we Joneses ought to go down to headquarters and look over the list of things to do again, huh?
You mind?
We were all kind of hoping to get something spectacular to do.
Well, most of war isn't spectacular. Darn little. You know, you people in Maplewood, why, chances are you'll never see your own artillery knock down Hitler's bombers. You'll never see a battle wagon land a heavy one on an enemy ship. Never watch the slick come up where a sub went down. Never see an American cannon chuck a slug into a jet tank. You'll just work harder. And when you watch that suit get shabbier, Mrs., well, she won't have many permanents. No stockings. Food in the table grow a little less fancy. That's war, Jonesy. That's being a civilian of war. No fun. And plenty of no fun.
Yeah? Well, sure there's something to think about.
Well, Jonesy, I think I'd better be going.
Well, can't you stay over? The spare room.
I wish I could. I've got to catch that 9 o'clock.
Well, I'll call the folks. Mind that beam. Yes, I'm sure going to think about all you said tonight, Ed. I'm mighty appreciative of your taking the trouble to come out. Helen! Harry! Ed's leaving.
Harry! Mr. Bascom's going.
Well, Ed, I'll take you down to the station. Help you on with your coat?
Thanks, Joe.
The devil is Harry.
I was upstairs. Right now, you're standing on my foot.
I thought it was the rug.
Mr. Bascom, did you hear my bugle playing? Do you think I could bugle on a battleship by any chance?
Well, you'd be okay for Reveille anyhow. You stay with that chemistry, Hattie, and the laundry.
Well, if that's what the government insists on. See, Mr. Bascom, the White House isn't camouflaged, is it?
No, Hattie, it's still just as white as...
I know. As laundry. Well, here's to you. Keep it flying.
Well, good night, Mrs. Jones. That was a mighty fine supper. You got a fine boy.
Come back real soon.
I will, I sure will.
Tell the folks at Washington to buckle right down and stay with it till the old monument smokes like a chimney.
Goodbye, Mrs.
Bye.
Jones. Goodbye.
Mind these port steps are kind of high. We go left. Car's down by the orchard.
Oh, I'll walk, Jonesy. You know, save your tires.
Quite a piece to the station. I'll show you a shortcut down Pine Street.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful night. Handle of the dipper leans right out of the sky. Jonesy.
Yeah?
I didn't quite tell you all I came to say about winning the war or losing it. You know, the government can't tell you about the Army, the Navy, where it is, how it's doing as of today. The Axis tries hard to get us to tell, but the government doesn't even tell me those things. But it's promised to let you know every single fact it's able to. So I can say this. We got the 3 million finest kids ever went into an Army and Navy. But there's another fighting force, Jonesy, and you're in it. It's the rumors. That's your main fight, Jonesy. The enemy's trying more than anything else to shake your nerve, make you suspicious, confuse your thoughts, chase away your ideals, and your courage. Now, the Army can't fight that, Jonesy. Or the Navy, or the Air Corps. You gotta. You gotta fight the dirtiest, slickest propaganda on earth. Now, if they can mess up your common sense, they'll move right in afterwards with their whole army. You can lick Goebbels and his lunatic makers, Jonesy. Just remember who you are. An American. Remember how far America's come in 160 years. That's all. Stick your chin up when you hear the rumors. The wisecracks that try to make you mad at other Americans. And when you lift your chin, put in your gut. You belong to the Army, too.
I belong to the Army?
You. All the Joneses. You know, the Joneses have gotten in all the wars, but never before in this kind. You, Jonesy. On your own. 24 hours a day. On your own. Against slick German professors who've studied you like a bug for 40 years. You know, they've studied you till they know which hand you shake your salt with. Studied your fears, studied your faults, studied your hopes. What kind of powder you got for that kind of fighting, Jonesy? Can you take it?
I guess so, Ed. I guess I can.
You know, you've got the most important kind of ammunition, Jonesy. You're free. Decent. The whole darn 3 million plus square miles is yours. Adolf Hitler never drew a breath of free air or walked in the street of a country the people governed. Why, you do it all day. Don't lead with your chin. But, Jonesy, keep it high.
I get you. Well, from here you just cross the track.
Yep. Well, thanks. Oh, but remember, you belong to the Army, too. So fight. So long, Jonesy.
Good night, Ed. Stay with it, Ed. On your own. You and 135 million more. You belong to the Army, too.
You have been listening to You're on Your Own by Philip Wiley. The principals were Claude Rains, Ezra Stone, Hester Sondergaard, and Everett Sloan. The program was another war program.
The story behind the headlines. In cooperation with the American Historical Association, we again present Caesar Searchinger, noted foreign correspondent and writer, in an informal analysis of the news. Mr. Searchinger retraces the events of the past to help you in arriving at a fuller understanding of what is happening today. Tonight, Mr. Searchinger's subject is New Zealand as our partner in Pacific defense. Caesar Searchinger.
Good evening. The agitation for a Pacific War Council, with headquarters in Washington, has reached a new stage. The question was first raised by the Australian government some time ago when Prime Minister Curtin said that Australia looked to the United States for leadership in the Pacific War. Another phase of this Pacific defense problem was Australia's demand for representation in an Imperial War Cabinet in London, which has now reached its sequel in the appointment of Richard G. Casey, Australian Minister in Washington, to the British War Cabinet as Minister of State. Since last weekend, there have been discussions at the White House with Dr. Herbert Everett,
the Australian Minister of External Affairs, who's now on a special mission to this country, and with Walter Nash, the recently appointed New Zealand Minister in Washington. President Roosevelt afterwards spoke of the teamwork and contact between the three countries, meaning Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. By the end of the week, it seemed that the creation of a Pacific War Council was on the verge of formation, pending, of course, the expected concurrence of the British government. Behind these recent moves is the changed condition in the Pacific area. The old ABCD command, Australian, British, Chinese, Dutch, has, as the President put it, gone out of business with the fall of the Netherlands Indies. What forces the Dutch have left are merged with those of Australia. China is collaborating closely with the British forces in Burma, and its function in the Pacific area is now confined to its internal defense. British naval and land forces are fully occupied in other theaters of war, and General Wavell's headquarters have been moved to India. The Pacific area is therefore completely in the hands of the Pacific countries, Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. The arrival of General MacArthur in Australia and the recent activities of the Japanese in that area have focused our attention on that continent. But New Zealand is an equally vital factor in the strategy of the United Nations, so I'm going to say a few things about that. It is no less necessary to hold New Zealand as Australia itself, for if the Japanese were to land in New Zealand, they would be able to cut our communications with Australia, and they could outflank any offensive which we might launch against Japan. In such an offensive, New Zealand may become a secondary base of operations. Even now, Auckland and Wellington are chief termini of our trans-Pacific supply lines, and New Zealand is, of course, an essential supply base, especially as regards that most vital material of war, namely food. With its extensive farming, stock-raising, and dairying industries, it is capable of supplying not only its own forces, but those in Australia, if the need should arise. But it is clear that an island nation with less than 1.75 million inhabitants cannot defend itself against invasion without outside aid. New Zealand has a standing army of about 30,000 men, plus a considerable home guard. When conscription was introduced in the summer of 1940, 80,000 New Zealanders had already volunteered for service overseas, 4,000 of them Maoris, the original New Zealand natives. By November, 20,000 of them were abroad, including a Maori battalion which earned undying fame in the defense of Crete. I shall tell you more about the Maoris later on. The number of men enlisted to date, Prime Minister Peter Fraser told an NBC audience last Monday, is equivalent to what a force of 11 million would be in the United States. However, in a nation of 1.7 million, that is less than 150,000. So while many New Zealanders are still fighting in other theaters of war, American soldiers are being sent to reinforce the defenders of New Zealand itself. That is a good thing in more ways than one. For in this way, a number of Americans are going to become acquainted with one of the most beautiful, salubrious, and socially advanced countries in the world, and one which embodies many of the best features of our own in miniature. The size of New Zealand is somewhat less than New England plus New York State. It consists of two rather narrow islands, North Island and South Island, stretching for about 1,000 miles from northeast to southwest. They are approximately as far south of the equator as our Pacific coast is north of it. So in climate, you get something like Seattle at one end and something like Los Angeles at the other. In other words, ideal. The scenery of the country is spectacular. From steep, snow-covered mountain ranges of over 10,000 feet, glaciers descend to within 1/4 mile of the sea, in some places through the dense evergreen of a subtropical forest. It's a paradise for the big game fisherman and the mountain climber. Some parts of New Zealand have reminded people of Japan, and there is even a close rival to Fujiyama, the snow-capped cone of Mount Egmont. Yet there is much of the homely atmosphere characteristic of fertile, temperate countries that appeals to the romantic European. In this, as in other respects, New Zealand is very different from its nearest neighbor, Australia, about 1,300 miles away, which is a continent the size of the United States, a place of wide open spaces and much of it arid. But the contrasts go deeper than geography. Australia has long had a vigorous nationalism of its own. New Zealand still preserves a strong sentimental attachment for England. Even third-generation New Zealanders who have never been outside the country continue to speak of England as home. Australia, in spite of its enormous sheep-raising industry, has become considerably industrialized in the last 2 decades. New Zealand still remains predominantly a country of farms and pastures. It has, in fact, been described as a kind of outlying dairy farm for Great Britain. There are also important historical and political differences between Australia and New Zealand. Australia has adopted a federal constitution based in many respects on our own. Consequently, it has 6 state governments as well as a federal government. New Zealand, though it formerly had provincial governments, abolished them and set up a single unitary government for the whole country. In other respects, however, their political institutions are similar. Both are self-governing dominions with a prime minister and a cabinet responsible to Parliament. The British King is represented by a Governor-General whose functions are purely formal. The story of New Zealand's settlement is practically unique. It was the result of an idealist's dream. In the early years of the 19th century, one Edward Gibbon Wakefield had a vision of solving England's social economic problems by systematic overseas colonization. His idea was to transplant a replica of English society from the country squire and the urban capitalist to the farmhand, artisan, and clerk to somewhere overseas. The enterprise was to be financed from the sale of land duly acquired from the natives. Christian benevolence and social enlightenment were to do the rest. After a preliminary experiment in South Australia, Wakefield's eye lighted on New Zealand, which Cook had once tried to annex for King George III. But the British government, still remembering all the trouble with the North American colonies, wasn't any more helpful to Wakefield than it had been to Captain Cook. Until, in 1840, a rival French settlement company was threatening to get ahead of the British. Thereupon, Queen Victoria's ministers gave their blessing and signed a treaty with the native Maori chiefs, which transferred sovereignty to the British Crown. The Maoris had already been affected by Christianity, and it was their trust in the Christian missionaries that induced them to sign. Wakefield's dream to transplant a cross-section of English society didn't altogether come true. But his careful organization of the colonists has left a permanent mark. It facilitated the orderly settlement of the uncultivated land of the country. In consequence, New Zealand has always been much more a country of small individual farmers in contrast to the vast sheep and cattle ranches of Australia, in the early days at least. And the inspiration of Wakefield, the reformer, lives on today in the outstandingly progressive social legislation in which New Zealand has been a pioneer. It may be said to have had its New Deal about 50 years ago. In the 1890s, New Zealand's government established such things as old age pensions and widows' pensions, family allowances, government loans to homeowners, government-operated insurance companies, etc. Women's suffrage was adopted in New Zealand many years before here. And recently, under the Labour government, which came into power in 1935, there have been other important measures of social welfare, including the establishment of an all-embracing system of social security, including unemployment, health and old age, and medical care. As the result of its infant welfare program, New Zealand has the lowest rate of infant mortality in the world. Wealth in New Zealand is better distributed than in most countries. Real incomes of the lower middle classes, that is, incomes in terms of purchasing power, are on the average higher than those of corresponding groups in America. New Zealand is the youngest white man's country in the world. Up to 1840, it was inhabited not by primitive aborigines like Australia, but by a relatively cultured and decidedly warlike branch of the Polynesian race, the Maori. The Maoris migrated to New Zealand from somewhere in the Central Pacific from 500 to 600 years ago, in canoes, mind you, an incredible feat of seamanship. For centuries, they managed to resist white settlement, except for some missionaries in the north, although the islands had been discovered by the Dutch navigator Tasman as far back as 1642. Although the white man did not settle in New Zealand till 200 years later, his treatment of the Maori was only somewhat better than his treatment of the American Indian over here. It was the same old story of thousands of acres of valuable land turned over to the white settlers for a few guns or blankets, though eventually the New Zealand government set up a land court to protect the Maoris' remaining heritage. It was largely because of disputes over land that various Maori tribes embarked on fierce wars against the settlers in the 1860s. They fought with great skill and bravery. In one case, when the Maoris were surrounded and called upon to surrender, they sent out an envoy with a message which has since then become the motto of a New Zealand regiment: Ake ake kia ka. We will fight on forever and ever. On one occasion, having taken the Christian teachings seriously, they actually stopped fighting on Sunday, and they felt bitterly betrayed when the British troops took advantage of this to launch an attack. In the days of fighting, the Maori warrior earned the respect and admiration of the British soldier. Today, every New Zealander has a genuine fondness for the Maori citizen. To have Maori blood in your veins is a distinction. After a period of decline, the Maoris have found their feet in the new order of things. Their numbers are increasing, and they share in the possession of the land and the nation's prosperity. Maoris sit in Parliament. Some have risen to cabinet rank. The Maori soldier is as famous for his valor today as his forefather was. He has served the British Empire in the last war, and he is fighting for his country's democracy today. For there is no doubt in anybody's mind that New Zealand deserves the name of democracy as much as any country on earth, and the responsibility for defending it must naturally be shared by us. It is true that we in this country haven't been very conscious of this younger sister democracy across the seas. In peacetime, international relations are apt to be based very largely on trade, on export and import trade. And while we have sold 5 times as much to New Zealand as she has sold to us, a country of 1.7 million can absorb only just so much. Not till 2 months ago did the two countries think it worthwhile to exchange diplomatic envoys. But the eminence of these two men indicates how important these relations have suddenly become. New Zealand has sent us Peter Nash, the intellectual leader of the Labour Party, and until recently the dominating figure in the cabinet. We have sent no less a person than Patrick J. Hurley, former Secretary of War. It's clear that New Zealand's importance in the world struggle cannot be measured by her size alone. If we are to have a Pacific Council, War Council, New Zealand is as indispensable in it as Australia and the United States. And when we consider the principles involved in this war, New Zealand stands out as a shining example of all the things we are fighting for: genuine dynamic democracy and the freedom of man. Good night.
You've been listening to Caesar Searchinger, whom we presented in cooperation with the American Historical Association. Next Sunday evening, Caesar Searchinger will be back with another story behind the headline. The story